As the 17th century dawned, Europe was undergoing a transformation. The Renaissance had rekindled a thirst for knowledge, exploration, and expansion. This period saw the emergence of powerful nation-states with centralized monarchies, professional armies, and a burgeoning sense of national identity. Maritime advancements played a crucial role. The development of the caravel, astrolabe, and more accurate maps enabled explorers to venture further into unknown waters. Portugal and Spain were the pioneers, with explorers like Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus charting new routes to India and the Americas, respectively. These discoveries opened up vast new territories, rich in resources and trading opportunities. However, it wasn't long before other European powers recognized the potential of these new lands. The English, Dutch, and French began to challenge the Iberian dominance at sea. The establishment of the English East India Company in 1600 and the Dutch East India Company in 1602 marked the beginning of a new era of trade and colonization. These joint stock companies, backed by their respective governments, had the authority to wage war, negotiate treaties, and establish colonies. The competition was fierce. The Dutch, with their superior naval technology and innovative financial systems, managed to wrest control of key trade routes from the Portuguese and Spanish. They established a network of trading posts and colonies stretching from the Cape of Good Hope to the Spice Islands of Indonesia. Meanwhile, England, under the Tudors and Stuarts, began its foray into the New World. The early settlements in Virginia and the Caribbean were primarily driven by the promise of wealth from resources like tobacco, sugar, and cotton. The mercantilist policies of the time emphasized the importance of accumulating wealth, and colonies played a pivotal role in this economic strategy. They provided raw materials for the mother country and served as captive markets for manufactured goods. France, not to be left behind, began its exploration and colonization of North America. The vast territories of New France, covering parts of modern-day Canada and the United States, became a source of fur and other valuable commodities. Yet, as these empires expanded, so did their rivalries. Territorial disputes, trade conflicts, and naval battles became common. The seeds of competition sown in the 17th century would grow over the next 2 centuries, intertwining the fates of these European powers in a complex web of alliances, treaties, and conflicts. The stage was being set for larger confrontations, as the ambitions of these empires would soon collide on a global scale. As the 18th century unfolded, the ambitions of European powers reached new heights. The Age of Enlightenment brought with it ideas of progress, science, and reason, but it also intensified the race for colonies and global dominance. The world map was rapidly changing, with European flags being planted on distant shores, from the icy landscapes of Canada to the tropical jungles of Southeast Asia. The 7 Years' War, spanning from 1756 to 1763, epitomized the global nature of these colonial rivalries. Often dubbed the First World War, it saw major European powers clashing across continents. While Frederick the Great's Prussia battled Austria and France in Europe, the British and French locked horns in North America, the Caribbean, India, and even the Philippines. By war's end, Britain emerged as the world's preeminent colonial power, having seized vast territories in India, North America, and the Caribbean. However, the cost of maintaining and defending these vast territories was immense. In an attempt to offset these costs, Britain imposed taxes on its American colonies, leading to widespread discontent and eventually the American Revolution. The 13 Colonies' victory in 1783, aided by France, marked the first major blow to the European colonial system. The 19th century saw the rise of a new kind of imperialism. The Industrial Revolution had transformed Europe's economies, leading to an unprecedented demand for raw materials and new markets. Steamships and railways made it easier to access and control distant lands. Moreover, advances in medicine, especially the discovery of quinine as a treatment for malaria, made it feasible for Europeans to venture deeper into previously inhospitable regions, like the interiors of Africa and Asia. This period also witnessed the rise of nationalism, a potent force that both propelled European powers to expand and sowed the seeds of discontent in their colonies. The idea that a nation should have its own sovereign state became increasingly popular, leading to unifications in places like Germany and Italy. These newly unified nations were eager to establish their own empires and challenge the existing colonial order. Africa became the focal point of this new scramble. Previously, European powers had limited their African ambitions to coastal trading posts. But by the end of the 19th century, almost the entire continent was carved up among them. The Berlin Conference of 1884 to 85, convened by Otto von Bismarck, sought to regulate this colonization and prevent conflict among European powers. Ironically, while diplomats in Europe drew arbitrary borders on maps, they paid little heed to the ethnic, cultural, and historical realities on the ground, setting the stage for future conflicts in the region. In Asia, the British solidified their hold over India, making it the crown jewel of their empire. The French expanded in Indochina, while the Dutch consolidated their grip on Indonesia. China, weakened by internal strife and the Opium Wars, was subjected to a series of unequal treaties that favored European powers. Yet, as these empires grew, so did the tensions between them. The intricate web of alliances, treaties, and rivalries became even more complex. The world was becoming a chessboard, with major powers maneuvering for advantage, each move bringing them closer to a confrontation of unprecedented scale. The late 19th century ushered in an era often referred to as the New Imperialism. This was not just about acquiring territories. It was about direct control, administration, and exploitation. The European powers, armed with advanced weaponry and driven by industrial demands, looked towards Africa, a continent rich in resources yet relatively unexplored by them. The allure of Africa was manifold. Its vast landscapes held untapped reserves of rubber, diamonds, gold, and ivory. Beyond the economic incentives, there was a sense of national pride and prestige associated with acquiring colonies. Moreover, there was a belief, rooted in social Darwinism, that it was the Europeans' civilizing mission to bring progress and order to what they perceived as the Dark Continent. The scramble for Africa was swift and ruthless. Between the 1880s and the start of World War I, European powers claimed almost 90% of African territory. The British sought a continuous strip of colonies from Cape Town to Cairo, while the French envisioned a west-to-east axis across the continent. Belgium's King Leopold II, under the guise of humanitarian efforts, exploited the Congo's rubber resources, leading to atrocities against its people. Germany, Italy, Portugal, and Spain also staked their claims, each carving out their spheres of influence. Yet, the scramble was not without resistance. African leaders and kingdoms like the Ashanti and the Zulu put up fierce fights to defend their lands and sovereignty. However, they were often outmatched by European military technology, especially the Maxim gun, a machine gun that played a pivotal role in many colonial conquests. While the European powers were busy drawing borders in Africa, they were also eyeing other parts of the world. In the Pacific, islands became strategic coaling and naval stations, with Germany, Britain, and France establishing colonies. In the Middle East, the decline of the Ottoman Empire presented opportunities for Britain and Russia to expand their influence. This race for colonies was not just about land and resources. It was also about securing strategic advantages over rival powers. Control over key ports, railways, and trade routes could tilt the balance of power in any future conflict. As a result, the world saw a series of crises, from the Fashoda incident in Sudan between France and Britain to tensions in Morocco between Germany and France. The media played its role, with newspapers and journals fueling nationalistic fervor and championing imperialistic endeavors. Tales of adventure, exploration, and conquest captured the public's imagination. Figures like David Livingstone, Henry Morton Stanley, and Cecil Rhodes became household names, their exploits both celebrated and criticized. Yet, beneath the surface, the rapid pace of colonization and the intense rivalries were creating fault lines. The newly acquired colonies were not just territories on a map, they were potential flashpoints. As European powers built railways, fortified ports, and stationed troops, the stage was being set for a larger confrontation. The intricate dance of diplomacy, alliances, and saber-rattling was leading the world towards a precipice, with the shadow of a great war looming ever larger. The dawn of the 20th century saw the world interconnected like never before. The tendrils of global trade, fueled by the Industrial Revolution, reached into every corner of the globe. Steamships crisscrossed the oceans, railways spanned continents, and telegraphs transmitted messages at unprecedented speeds. But with this interconnectedness came a heightened sense of competition and vulnerability. European economies were now heavily reliant on their colonies. Rubber from the Congo, tea from India, and gold from South Africa flowed into European markets, driving industrial machines and filling state coffers. These raw materials were essential, not just for economic prosperity, but for maintaining a nation's global standing. Any disruption in the supply chain could have cascading effects, both economically and politically. This dependency led to an increased emphasis on securing and controlling trade routes. The Suez Canal, opened in 1869, became a lifeline for British imperial interests, drastically reducing the maritime route to India. Similarly, the Germans, under Kaiser Wilhelm II, sought to build the Berlin-Baghdad Railway, aiming to strengthen their influence in the Middle East and potentially challenge British naval dominance by having a closer route to the Persian Gulf. Such projects were not just feats of engineering. They were geopolitical chess moves. Control over these routes meant faster movement of troops, quicker communication, and most importantly, economic dominance. Naturally, they became sources of tension. Britain's control over the Suez Canal, for instance, was a constant thorn in the side of other European powers, especially the French and Germans. Furthermore, the growth of industrial capitalism led to an intense search for new markets. With domestic markets saturated, European manufacturers looked to their colonies and beyond to sell their goods. This led to economic spheres of influence, where powers would exert economic control over regions, even if they didn't have direct political control. China, with its vast population, became a prime target. The concept of the open door policy in China, proposed by the United States, aimed to ensure that all powers had equal trading rights, but in practice, regions of China were dominated by different European powers, leading to further tensions. Financial imperialism also played its part. European banks and financiers invested heavily in foreign lands, from railways in Latin America to mines in Africa. These investments often came with strings attached, allowing European powers to exert influence over the domestic policies of debtor nations. Yet, as the European powers expanded their economic reach, they increasingly stepped on each other's toes. Tariff wars, trade disputes, and economic espionage became common. The world's markets and resources, vast as they were, seemed insufficient to satiate the growing appetite of industrialized nations. Moreover, the intertwining of economies meant that a crisis in one part of the world could have repercussions elsewhere. The Panic of 1907, originating in the New York Stock Exchange, quickly spread to Europe, causing bank failures and economic downturns. Such incidents highlighted the fragility of the global economic system. As the stakes grew higher, so did the rhetoric. Nationalistic fervor, stoked by media and political elites, painted economic rivalries in stark, zero-sum terms. Economic downturns were blamed on foreign machinations, and trade disputes were seen as affronts to national honor. The lines between economic interests and national security began to blur, and the world's major powers, while intertwined economically, grew increasingly distrustful of each other's intentions. This atmosphere of suspicion and competition, set against the backdrop of a rapidly changing world, was a potent mix, leading nations down a path where economic interests and imperial ambitions were on a collision course. In the southeastern corner of Europe, a region of diverse cultures, religions, and histories simmered with tension. The Balkans, often referred to as the powder keg of Europe, became a focal point where the aspirations of empires and the passions of nationalist movements converged. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire had dominated the Balkans. But by the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the once mighty empire was in decline, earning the moniker the sick man of Europe. As the Ottomans retreated, they left behind a vacuum, and the question of who would fill this void became a source of major international contention. Russia, with its Slavic and Orthodox Christian ties, felt a kinship with many of the Balkan peoples and aimed to extend its influence in the region. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, to the north, had its own designs on the Balkans, seeing it as a buffer against both Russian expansion and the rising tide of nationalism within its own diverse borders. The Balkan states themselves, Serbia, Bulgaria, Greece, Montenegro, and others, were not mere pawns in this great game. They had their own nationalist dreams. Serbia, in particular, harbored ambitions of creating a Greater Serbia, a unified state for all South Slavic peoples. This vision directly threatened Austro-Hungarian interests, especially given the significant Slavic population in the empire's southern territories. The tensions in the region were further exacerbated by a series of Balkan wars in the early 20th century. These conflicts, primarily fought among the Balkan states themselves, were over territory and influence in the post-Ottoman landscape. They were marked by shifting alliances, with countries like Bulgaria and Serbia first fighting side by side against the Ottomans, only to later turn against each other. These wars, while localized, drew the attention of all major European powers. They were not just about the Balkans, they were seen through the prism of the larger European balance of power. Any shift in the region's dynamics could have ripple effects across the continent. Germany, allied with Austro-Hungary, watched with growing concern, while Britain and France, wary of the Central Powers' intentions, looked for ways to counterbalance their influence. Yet, it was the intricate web of alliances and the shadow of nationalism that made the Balkans particularly volatile. The Serbian nationalist movement, for instance, found support in Russia, which saw itself as the protector of Slavic peoples. Austro-Hungary, feeling encircled and threatened, sought assurances from Germany. These alliances meant that any localized conflict had the potential to escalate rapidly. This became tragically clear on June 28, 1914, in Sarajevo, when Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austro-Hungary was assassinated by Gavrilo Princip, a Bosnian Serb nationalist. This act, born out of nationalist fervor and the complex geopolitics of the Balkans, set off a chain reaction. Ultimatums were issued, armies mobilized, and alliances activated. The Balkans, with its mix of imperial designs and nationalist dreams, had lit the spark. The world, with its intricate alliances and deep-seated rivalries, provided the kindling. The flames of war were about to engulf the globe. In the wake of the assassination in Sarajevo, the diplomatic machinery of Europe went into overdrive. Telegrams were sent, meetings convened, and leaders consulted. Yet, despite the flurry of activity, there was a sense of inevitability. The complex web of alliances, treaties, and mutual defense pacts designed to maintain peace now seemed to be pushing the continent inexorably towards war. Austro-Hungary, with Germany's backing, delivered a harsh ultimatum to Serbia. Serbia, while agreeing to most of the demands, couldn't acquiesce to them all, especially those that would compromise its sovereignty. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of the Slavic nations, began to mobilize its forces in defense of Serbia. Germany, bound by its alliance with Austro-Hungary and wary of the Russian threat, declared war on Russia. The dominoes began to fall. France, allied with Russia, found itself at war with Germany. Germany, following its Schlieffen Plan, invaded Belgium to outflank the French defenses, bringing Britain, which had guaranteed Belgium's neutrality, into the conflict. The world watched in disbelief as the great powers of Europe, driven by a mix of imperial ambitions, nationalistic fervor, and a tangled system of alliances, marched into a war of unprecedented scale. The optimism of the early 20th century, with its advances in science, technology, and culture, seemed to shatter overnight. The trenches of the Western Front, the battleships of Jutland, and the vast armies on the Eastern Front became symbols of a world at war. World War I, or the Great War as it was then known, would rage for 4 long years. It would see empires crumble, monarchies topple, and entire generations lost. The map of the world would be redrawn and the seeds for future conflicts sown. The war, which began in the Balkans, a region of competing imperial and nationalist ambitions, would end with a new world order. The age of empires was coming to a close, and a new era with its own challenges and complexities was dawning. The legacy of World War I is still felt today. It serves as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition, the perils of complex alliances, and the unpredictable nature of global events. It underscores the importance of diplomacy, understanding, and cooperation in an interconnected world. If you enjoyed this historical journey, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Each new viewer ignites our drive to share more tales from the past. Thank you.